When it comes to handling customer objections, it's really important to be good at handling the ones that you get all the time. But what if there was a way for you to stop those objections from even coming up in the first place? That's what we're going to talk about right now. Welcome back to another episode of Sales Lab Live. I'm David Priemer, and today we are going to be talking about one of my favorite, if I can say that, favorite objection handling tactics. You know, sometimes you think about objection handling tactics, at least for me, like children, you can't love them all. I have 3 kids. You can't love them all the same way. They're different people, right? So the same way I feel about my kids, I feel about my objection handling tactics. And I love this one that we're going to talk about today because it's kind of got it all. It's got like the science, it's got the empathy, it's got the tone, it's got the delivery. There's a certain amount of risk, but if you can pull it off, it is super powerful. And it's based on a scientific principle known as inoculation. And it's really designed for you to help circumvent objections that you know are going to come up in your sales cycles 80 or 90% of the time. So I want to explain what the tactic is. I want to explain why it works. I want to explain how to use it, because there's actually quite a lot of ways that you can bake this into not only your sales and marketing, but recruiting motions as well. We always talk about sales and life are basically the same thing, and this is a very, very powerful tactic. So what we're going to hit today is this topic of how you defend against recurring objections. And, in my content, in my book, in my training, I cover 10 different objection handling tactics, and they kind of, as I say, they escalate in level of complexity from the kind of the very apprentice to the Jedi Master level. But that doesn't mean that the ones at the end of the list are any, or at the beginning of the list are any less effective or just really, really simple. They require less finesse. They require less sophistication to pull off versus the one at the end. Now, the one at the end that we're actually going to talk about now is inoculation, tactic number 9. Now, just recently, I crafted a whole overview of this tactic on my blog, so if you want to check it out, this is the link. You can check it out by even the thumbnail with all the, the kind of the traps around. I like that visual. But the idea behind inoculation is really simple, right? If let's think about your sales cycle. If you know that there's an objection that's going to come up 8 or 9 times out of 10, okay? The simple reality of this tactic, you would be well advised to bring up that objection before the customer raises it and address it, which is really what this concept of inoculation is all about. It's funny, I wrote my book and have been talking about this tactic in a pre-pandemic world, but the reality is that this is a very powerful tactic based on science that dates all the way back to the 1960s, where a social psychologist named William McGuire came up with this theory known as inoculation theory. And the idea was, how can we help people become resistant to changing their minds? I'm giving you kind of the colloquial version, changing their minds on certain things, right? So if I have a belief that I've kind of have tightly held, it's going to be very hard to change my mind. So in an instance where, for example, the customer in your case has not been exposed to a particular objection before, how can we maybe expose them to a little bit of that objection before they see it in the wild? And very much like viral inoculation, or kind of, the inoculation that from a medical perspective, when they see that objection again in the wild, we expose them to weaker counter arguments to that particular objection. So we basically raise the objection for them, we address it, and so when they hear it or see it in the wild later on, they will be much more resistant to it. Now, it sounds very fancy and very scientific, but it's actually really, really simple. But those two components of raising the objection proactively and addressing it is the key to building your customers' immunity to them. So to give you a really simple example, maybe you have one of the more expensive solutions on the market, and you know that when the customer evaluates your solution and looks at other potential competitive solution or alternative solutions on the market, they're going to come to the conclusion that yours is one of the most expensive, right? So rather than wait for that objection to happen, again, we'll talk about why this is a calculated risk, right? Because if you know this is going to happen, like this happens all the time, customers call us out on being one of the most expensive solutions in the field. So we're going to raise that in advance and address it. So as you're presenting, for example, the customer pricing, you're going to say, now, hey, look, here's kind of what we've plotted out as far as the proposal. One of the things, if you shop around, and I want you to shop around, I want you to be really comfortable moving forward with us, is that you're going to find that we are going to be one of the most, from a list price perspective, one of the most competitive or one of the most expensive solutions on the market. But the reason you're going to find that is because, and you're going to give, now we don't have time to get into all of the other different kinds of objection handling tactics that we're going to chain together, which I actually, I'll go back to this for a second. When I talk about objection handling tactics, these aren't necessarily discrete tactics you're going to execute one by one. You're going to combine them together. So this idea of, let's say you're one of the most expensive solutions in the market, you say, well, look, one of the reasons as we present you the pricing, you're going to find we're more costly than the others is because, and you're going to give a reason. So either, let's say, your product is more robust, or we actually bake in a lot of the support, or, when you think about all of the extra add-ons and things that you would have to pay for with competitive A, B, and C products, they don't typically include those, but we give you the all-inclusive price. So it might appear to be more expensive at first. Whatever your explanation, or, hey, look, we do the best job. We've been around the longest. If your project cannot fail, that's why you would call us. Whatever your rationale, I'm not here to judge. You want to give that rationale when you raise the objection proactively, right? Let's say, for example, you're one of the newest players on the market. You don't have the same longevity as the players that have been around for a long time. Or maybe you're a startup. You're not as big as some of those other players. Again, if you sense that this is going to be an objection the customer's going to raise anyways, you'll be well served to raise that objection proactively and then address it early on. So for example, like, hey, look, as you're working with us, one of the things that you'll notice is that we are more of a boutique firm. We haven't been around long, but our team has a ton of experience solving this exact problem. And to be honest, a lot of the clients that we work with love the fact that we are small, that we're accessible, they have input into our product roadmap, they have access to our executives, all of these great things. And again, like, what am I doing? I'm saying these things so that later on, when maybe someone in your organization, the customer's organization, say, why are we doing business with this small startup with like very little experience? They're going to be like, well, actually, it's funny. They mentioned that, kind of right up front. And they said, one of the things that people love working about them or they love about working with them is A, B, and C. So we've inoculated them and given them ammunition as to why they would look at us. And you can imagine there's all sorts of objections. Maybe it's price. Maybe it's, organizational capability and experience. Maybe it's, for example, experience. Maybe we've been around for a long time, but you're the first customer of this particular type that we've worked with. Maybe the customer has a feature request or requirement to integrate with a certain solution that you've never done before, right? And you know that when this happens, the customer's always going to raise the issue of like, well, you've never done this before. So the take-home message is you want to raise proactively and address that objection before it comes up. Now, again, this is very powerful. I want to give you a really simple example here. Now, many people know this is not a secret. I am Canadian. I'm a proud Toronto boy. And in Canada, we have a chain of coffee and donut shops called Tim Hortons. And a few years ago, or let's say a couple years ago now, Tim Hortons decided to come out with a new variety of dark roast coffee. Now, here's the catch. They had come out with dark roast coffee a couple times before, and people hated it. So you can imagine now you're the advertising minds here at Tim Hortons, and you're thinking, hey, look, we want to take another shot at this. We want to come out with a new kind of dark roast coffee. But here's the thing. If we come out with this new kind of dark roast coffee and say, hey, we have this new kind of coffee, you should totally try it, what are people going to say? What are the customers going to say? They're going to be like, we've seen this movie before. You said it was coming out before. We tried it and it sucked. So you know what? I'm not going to try it again. So they know this. And so what do? They actually bake that objection into their advertising. So I want to play for you. I'm going to play for you right now. This is a commercial for the Tim Hortons dark roast coffee that they launched in 2021. Okay, I want you to, again, given what we talked about raising the objection proactively, I want you to take a look at what they've done in the realm of inoculating their customers. Okay, take a watch.
Have you heard we have a new dark roast?
Another one of them again?
I know a lot of people are skeptical because we've tried it a few times. So this was our 2014 dark roast.
Watery with a bitter aftertaste. Is that too mean?
Our 2017, well, that's much worse.
Ooh, they just lost out on that year altogether.
Moment of truth, 2021.
It's got a stronger taste.
It's rich, it's smooth.
It has that bold coffee taste. You definitely nailed it this time.
Really powerful, right? And I've shown that video to lots of clients, and people have said, yeah, you know what? Did they think the dark roast was better than the previous years? I think the unanimous decision is that it was better. Is it worth investing in time and time again? Maybe not. But did they try it after seeing that commercial? 100%, right? Because the vendor inoculated the customer saying, we know we screwed up before, but now times aren't going to be different. Now, here's the thing. I want to kind of mention there's a few different ways that you can use this tactic in your sales, marketing, and recruiting motion, right? So obviously you can use it on the sales side, which is what we were just talking about. You can bake it into, for example, your sales playbooks. You can train your reps on it. They should be familiar with kind of seeing these kinds of objections. And in fact, I was talking to a client the other day. One of the great ways of baking inoculation into your sales motion has to do with, now I'm going to get a little bit cerebral, has to do with the problem your customers are looking to solve. So let's say, for example, your customer's looking to solve a problem of trying to save money or increasing revenue or increasing retention or customer satisfaction or whatever it is. And your product or service has a very unique way of doing that. When you present that solution to your customer, let's say, for example, I'm trying to sell you some Cerebral selling training program. And I'm going to tell you that, hey, look, if you take this training and you learn these tactics, you're going to increase your conversion rate in certain parts of your sales funnel, and it's going to increase your revenue. And that's true. But you might look at my training program and you might say, yes, David, that's true. However, there's lots of ways that we can improve our conversion rates. We could hire better salespeople. We could improve our website. We could make our product even better. We could do more marketing. There's lots of things we can do to improve our conversion rate that has nothing to do with training, right? And so my clients get these kinds of objections. I never get those objections, but no, my clients get these kinds of objections all the time. And so what can happen is that the customers now become slightly less interested in their product because they're like, well, I get what you're saying, but I'm solving this problem another way. And so one of the things you can do to inoculate your customers is as you're talking about the problem that you're helping them solve, and if you know that, for example, you can help them solve that problem in a much more cost-effective way, in a faster way, than maybe something that they're doing already, you might say hey, look, now it's interesting, we're talking about increasing your conversion rate and you're thinking of potentially investing in my training, and that comes with a price tag of X and time commitment of Y. Now, here's the thing. There's lots of things you could probably do to improve your conversion rates. However, the reason why most people tend to invest in training is because, over these things is because A, B, and C. So there's a bit of a cerebral way, as you're trying, it doesn't have to be an objection that surfaces as a standard objection that you would hear with very fierce objection language. But it could be again, a softer objection where people are saying, well, you know what, maybe we shouldn't invest in this right now. Timing could also be an objection. I get this a ton from the clients that I work with, not necessarily about training again, but about their products and services. They're trying to sell a product and service to a company, and the company says, you know what, this all sounds really good, but we're just focused on other things at the moment. We have other priorities. Now's not the right time. We could inoculate those customers by saying, now look, as you look at our solution and how we can help, one of the things that people often say is now's not the right time. Imagine you were joining my gym. I don't have a gym, but let's say you were joining my gym. And I know that a lot of people procrastinate on coming to the gym. I say, look, you're interested in taking some personal training lessons with me, which of course you don't want to do with me, but you're going to take some personal training lessons with me. And I say, now look, as you sign up, one of the challenges is that, sometimes people, they sign up and then they don't come, right? They don't show up to the lessons. And I want to make sure you show up. So again, you see, I'm inoculating you against the potential objections you're going to give me around oh, I don't know if I have the time, or I don't know if I'm going to have the focus to do it. So sales is kind of your meat and potatoes way of addressing objections, in the sales motion, using this inoculation tactic. However, there's other ways you can use inoculation, such as in your marketing. So for example, let's say you are always going to be one of the most costly solutions in the market. You might want to have, on your pricing page, a ROI calculator, right? Or let's say, for example, I always think about this, and I talk about this in the article I mentioned earlier. Salesforce has their annual conference, Dreamforce. It's the biggest software conference of all time. But it's not cheap. I think a ticket to Dreamforce might be $3,000, $4,000, something in that. It's like thousands of dollars to come to Dreamforce for a week. And they know, however, that the people who are signing up to Dreamforce are going to have to sell other people in their organization on the cost of attending the conference. So when I'm a Salesforce administrator, I go back to my sales leader, I say, hey, look, I want to go to Dreamforce. They say, sure. How much does it cost? And I say it's going to be thousands of dollars. And they say, oh my gosh, that's way more than I thought. Rather than get blindsided by that objection, what they do is they put a Dreamforce ROI calculator right on the site. So they say, if you are a Salesforce administrator and you need to justify to your company why you would invest in this conference, like here's the value you're going to get back in terms of like free consulting, meetings with industry experts, all that kind of stuff. It's like free training. And it's very, very detailed. So that's a way you can bake it into your marketing. You might even have like on your pricing page, and you see this a lot, feature comparison breakdowns against potential like other packages that for example, you offer on your website, or even competitors. Here's how you stack up against your competitors when you're in a particular industry that has like very kind of comparable features and functions. If you know that there's going to be a customer out there saying, well, you know what, like I like your solution, but this other solution out there seems to be more feature rich or has features I would use. Have a product comparison and feature breakdown, or at least even a competitive element to your marketing on your website to circumvent that objection later on. So very, very powerful. But I'll tell you, like, and this is, some of the other ways you can use inoculation where you might not think to do it. And this is something I was talking about on the blog, but this is something that we used to do at WorkBrain a little bit, or so not WorkBrain. WorkBrain was my first startup. We used to do that at Salesforce a little bit. And, it was interesting, when you work in sales is a tough gig, right? And so it can be very easy for someone to get disenfranchised and dejected when they start at a new sales role, and a few months into it, they're not seeing the success that they saw maybe in their previous role. And what happens is they can get kind of disenfranchised and say, forget this. This job is not the right fit for me. And that's good for no one, right? And so sometimes back at Salesforce, we had this problem where, people were kind of down in the dumps. We had some people even resign and say, hey, you know what? I don't think I'm not getting this. I look at David, I look at Steve, I look at, Jennifer, and they have their act down to, I'll never be as good as you all. And we didn't have any performance concerns with these individuals, but we also didn't want them to get dejected and demoralized early on in the role. So one of the things that we started to do was inoculate them during the sales cycle. So we know that if 3 months down the road, the reps are going to be on the doldrums because they think they're not executing as well as they believe they should be able to, then we would tell them during the interview process. We said, hey, look, you're going to love it here. There's, it's a lot of hard work, but it's a great place to be, to learn, to execute. The caliber of the organization is really high. But here's the thing. A few months in, you might feel like quitting. You might feel like this is a really tough job and it's a lot harder than you thought. And I want you to know that's completely normal. There's been tons of reps that have gone through the exact same experience and come out the other end. You've gone to President's Club. Even people who've been on performance plans, they push through that adversity and they emerge much stronger and well-adjusted on the other side. So what do you think's going to happen next time that rep, 3 months down the road says, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be? They're going to remember that David told them during the interview process that this was normal, and they're going to push through that. They're going to be a lot more resilient to that. And you actually see that, very simply, like you see this all over the place. In the medical profession, you get a procedure, you get a surgery, you get, some work done on your tooth, and the doctor, the dentist, whoever it is says, so here's what you can expect, right? There's going to be some pain, there's going to be some swelling, there's going to be this, that, the other thing. And so what happens is when that happens later on, you don't freak out because you were told that this is going to happen. So inoculation is very, very powerful, not only for overcoming the objections, but I talk about this in my training programs, how, all objections are very emotionally rooted, right? This idea that when we launch an objection, yes, there's a logical component to it, but they're almost always emotional, to some degree. And I talk about this actually in my training, in my book. I call this the objection intent spectrum. And so being able to not only handle the tactical objection, but the emotional part of the objection so people don't blow it up out of proportion is very, very important. Now, I want to mention a couple quick things really important as it relates to inoculation. So here's the downside. and there's downside of any objection handling tactic. So downside number one is that it's a risk. You are raising an objection that may or may not exist in the mind of your customer. So for example, if your customer wasn't thinking that your objection was, or your product or service was particularly expensive, and now you say, well, we're one of the most expensive on the market. Now all of a sudden they're like, hold on a second, like maybe I had this completely wrong. Maybe I need to look at different solutions that are a little bit more cost effective, right? So you don't want to raise objections that don't exist. That's why I say these objections need to be things that come up 80 or 90% of the time. And I say 80 or 90% of the time could be under a particular set of circumstances. So let's say the issue of price doesn't come up unless you are competing. Let's say we're Salesforce and we're competing against Microsoft. So we're not necessarily going to talk about price unless we're competing, unless we know we're competing or Microsoft is the incumbent vendor. Because whenever Microsoft is in the mix, they're always going to talk about how they're less expensive than Salesforce. I'm giving you this like for example, right? So it could be under a specific set of circumstances. It could be based on the role of the person you're speaking to. So you need to make a calculated decision as to when and if you're going to bring this up, and that in and of itself poses a certain amount of risk. The second part of the risk is that it also depends where in the sales cycle you decide to bring this up. So for example, if you take this example of price inoculation, hey look, we're going to be one of the most expensive solutions in the market, and that's because A, B, and C, and you think about your sales cycle, the reality is like your customer doesn't care about price equally at every stage of that cycle. Maybe at the beginning, they're just looking for vendors who could potentially even solve the problem, and the price, getting down to the nuts and bolts isn't as important. So if you bring up price too early, then you could potentially scare the customer off. On the flip side, if you bring it up at the end, I know my head's blocking, it says it's too late, the decision's already been made at stage 7, then that's going to be ineffective as well. So you want to raise the inoculation objection handle at a time and place in the sales cycle when the customer is going to be most sensitive and it's most relevant to do that. So be mindful that you got to bring it up not only at the right time, but also to the right person. So that's this very powerful tactic. Now, I mentioned there's a lot of content available. You can read my book that has a little bit more content on this. You can look at my website. But if you want to dive deeper into all of these objection handling tactics and you want something a little bit more comprehensive, then one of the best ways to do that is through my Sales Academy course. And this actually is a very comprehensive course. It goes through all of my key foundational sales principles from messaging and discovery and objection handling and even negotiation. So you can check it out at cerebralselling.com/sales academy, but that will give you a very comprehensive view into how and where to use all of these tactics. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this conversation on inoculation. Take it to heart. It's very powerful, but with great power comes great responsibility. So that's all I have for you today on Sales Lab Live, and I wish you all the best in your objection handling efforts.